Eh bien, bienvenue à toutes et à tous.
Welcome to all of you for this debate on transportation in this international forum organized by CGT, the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation at the Summit.
Global Union Institute, forum qui s'étale sur toute la semaine. Il a commencé lundi.
This forum will last all week and will end on Saturday in the afternoon. As you can see, we work quite a lot on the forum. I already thank the panelists for their interventions during this debate and for their involvement. This needed a lot of effort and exchanges between us. We have more than 600 participants to this round table. The week has gathered 125 trade union organizations from 50 different countries, which means that all this event is a great success already. And I hope that many of you will follow us today. We will be talking about transport, and as we will deal with it from a transition point of view, we will divide our session in 4 blocks. We will start with cooperation between the different transport modes. Then we will talk about international solidarity. Afterwards, how to meet the population needs, and finally, what public investments are needed internationally speaking. I am accompanied on
Le Méraire à ma droite pour la fédération l'Union internationale des transports CGT. À ma gauche, Jean-Philippe Châtel, le secrétaire général des officiers de marine marchands de CGT. Et à mon extrême gauche, David Donès pour la fédération Cheminots. Et moi-même qui suis, je ne me suis pas présenté, donc David Gobet, président de la section Cheminots de la Fédération internationale des ouvriers des transports. Eh bien écoutez, on va commencer à lancer le débat, un débat qui va commencer sur la coopération entre les modes. Je salue mes collègues autour du monde qui ont participé à la préparation, et je vais peut-être me tourner tout de suite vers John Kerr du RMTU de Nouvelle-Zélande. Alors John, il est très tard pour toi, donc je suis presque tenté de te dire bonne nuit, parce qu'il est 23 h en Nouvelle-Zélande. En tout cas, d'abord un grand merci pour ta participation, parce qu'à des horaires aussi tardifs, vraiment c'est exceptionnel. Et donc, je perds mon micro, et donc je te donne sans plus attendre, John, la parole pour présenter à la fois ton organisation syndicale, la situation des cheminots en Nouvelle-Zélande, et comment s'organise la coopération à la fois sur le mode marchandises et passagers entre d'autres modes de transport.
Good evening from New Zealand. Thank you, David. My name is John Kerr. I am an organizer with the Rail and Maritime Transport Union here in New Zealand. New Zealand has been through a cycle of privatization and renationalization of rail. The bulk of our rail network is back in public ownership. However, there is very little by way of coordination between the road and rail sectors. Our government is investing heavily in rail, however, and we are going through the biggest program of investment that we've experienced since the 1930s in rail. Our union, there is only one union in the rail sector in New Zealand, and our union is affiliated to the ruling centre-left Labour Party. Many of you will have seen our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who is quite an international figure. It's a very centrist party, but it is heavily committed towards investing in rail. That said, only 16% of New Zealand's freight is transported by rail. Because of our affiliation to the ruling party, our union has access and influence with the responsible ministers, and there is a bipartisan commitment in our country towards a radical program to reduce emissions. So taken together, the picture is quite a hopeful one in comparison to many other countries. We have rolled back the neoliberal tide to a degree, in that the rail sector has been largely renationalized, and there is the beginnings of a national strategy to reduce emissions using moving more freight by rail and getting it off the roads. Also, because of our geography, coastal shipping is very much back on the agenda. So I bring a message of hope. That is one that is tempered, however, by the fact that because we are a small country and a relatively small economy, investment in long-distance passenger travel is really beyond our government's purse. And suburban commuter train services remain privatized in our two cities where we actually have commuter rail. Our second biggest city, where I live in Christchurch, there is no commuter rail. So although the picture I present is a hopeful one, where we have a union and workers that have real influence in the rail sector, there are considerable constraints that we face. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and to open the proceedings. And kia ora from the South Pacific.
Merci John de cette.
Thank you for this presentation. Indeed, New Zealand is an interesting model because of its renationalization, even if, as you just mentioned, things are not perfect. Private interests do not make cooperation between transport modes easy. I would like now to turn towards my Ukrainian colleague. I don't know if it's Polizia or Yadvingunova who's going to take the, who's going to take the floor of Vladimir on the situation in the Ukraine and how you collaborate with your federation on other transport modes. And if you could also introduce your trade union to all the people connected. So I'm going to give the floor to Vladimir, I believe, Vladimir Kozetsky from KPVU from Ukraine. Vladimir, you have the floor.
Right, I would like to welcome everyone. I represent here the Confederation of the Rail Workers Union of Ukraine, which is a confederation. I would like to say that the situation at railway and in Ukraine has underwent a reform, and it has been going on for 5 or 7 years. However, it is still in the state-run sector, the way I see it right now. And we see that the improvement of the workers are still not there. The situation is deteriorating. We have tried to instruct people and to conduct a so-called Italian strike. So we started talking about that at the parliamentary committee meeting, at the Ministry of Infrastructure. It is part of the structure. And we have contacted high position people. We have tried to ensure that the wages go up. We've tried to improve the working conditions. We've tried to introduce some bonuses. And of course, it's difficult for you to appreciate our situation because it is quite specific in Ukraine. And we try to retire the old rolling stock because it is not well maintained, and we understand that corruption schemes were at play and they are still being implemented. So our trade union tried to have documents signed, tried to inform the relevant bodies. So this is the situation we're facing right now. I would like to point out that we're preparing for actions again. Why did we decide to conduct an Italian strike and not a usual one, just like in France, for example? Because under the law, the transport workers are not allowed to strike. And there is a ruling of the European Court, and our trade unions have addressed them, but our parliament has not ratified this decision. And there are new laws on transport, and it has not been adopted. So we're still using the old law, which prohibits transport workers from striking. So we're conducting pickets, we're trying to block some roads, we're trying to force the government to accept that right. And we're following the instructions because this is the only method which can improve the situation of our railway workers. So please note that the wages are very low. So the railway workers of Ukraine earn very little. And the material, the rolling stock is very old and outdated. I remember Danes visiting us, and we showed them our depot. They had a look at the instrument and at the technique we use. So they were surprised, they were amazed. And please understand me, I don't complain. We're trying to improve our situation. And our new ministers and civil service look at it in a different way. Their eyes have been opened. We are receiving some new machines, but this is the result of the struggle the trade union are conducting. So this is what I wanted to say. Do you have any questions? Can you hear me, by the way? Because I'm not getting anything. I'm not getting any sound. Once again, I would like to ask you, can you hear me?
Tout était absolument clair. Alors peut-être pour nos collègues interprètes ou francophones, la grève italienne.
Yes, you were very clear.
I would like to apologize because I'm mixing two languages here. I'm mixing Ukrainian and Russian, so my apologies to the interpreters.
Delegate and David.
Right, so that's all I had to say. I hope you can hear me. Are there any questions? Maybe I've missed something here, because I've been part of collective negotiations this morning, and I've not fully landed here. You know, I'm full of emotions and I'm full of nerves because the negotiations, the collective bargaining negotiations are ongoing. That's why.
Que la grève italienne, on va dire, comme vous l'appelez en Ukraine.
the Italian strike, as you say, we understand it's a strike where the people aren't doing anything. And I'm always surprised by the
Tu vas réintervenir plus
moment
tard
when the railroads are concerned. But Vladimir will be talking later again, then we will have the opportunity to answer your questions, or people will be able to ask you questions. Maybe we'll now look towards my comrade Frédéric Lemairer, who's the General Secretary of the Union of Transports. Frédéric, could you please talk about the need for cooperation between different transport modes? Yes, of course. I'd like to say to start welcoming you, and I'm very happy to be able to work with you on this international forum, because this is a very important topic for the climate change. Of course, transportation is going to increase with time, and in France, the freight is expected to increase by more than 80% in 2050. The same thing is true for
nous ne nous préoccupons pas de la question de transport.
Not take care about the transport issue, thinking only about competition, we will be confronted with dramatic situations, in particular those that are related with the environment. Any study from the GIEC or from the International Energy Agency, the GHGs are responsible for the heating of the planet, and the transport is the first one on the list of responsibles for the situation. So we need to work complementarily in all the transportation modes and not in competition. And this is what the capital is doing at this stage. Why? Because with transportation, the capital is organizing social dumping, competition between the workers, and this leads to a lowering of the social standards for the workers in transport in France in particular. So I'm going to show you what we do in France. In France, our trade union tries to coordinate the transport activity in France, thinking of complementarity and putting it as a central piece of our cooperation. And we believe that it's important that at the end, the general interest be more important than the interests of the shareholders. The question we ask is, must we let the capital have its way, as they've been doing for 40 years now, with this increase of the transport, which, as a matter of fact, turned to be a failure, because now the greenhouse gas emissions are increasing and do not stop increasing? Or should we engage the public administration for transportation and ask if we should not leave the logic that is behind the International Organization for Transport, so that the situation can improve? We in France believe that the right to transport is fundamental, but we must be given alternate possibilities that will not generate GHGs. And now we realize that as long the capital organizes transport, we realize that they do not care about the general interest in climate change. CGT has alternative proposals, and we believe that these proposals should be discussed with you internationally, because transport is something that we deal with every day with its difficulties. Today, it are the developed countries which are the biggest GHG emitters, but it's the whole planet that is suffering the consequences of those emissions. So we also need to think of how we organize transport in the territories, in the countries, and in the continents. We realize that transport is a network, so we need to confront our ideas and experiences, and it's the common interest that must win on the social issues and the climate issues, so that the workers can have the better working conditions. We have too many examples of social dumping where we oppose trade unions, transport, which ends up leading to a reduction of social standards. And this is not what the CGT wants to build as a society. We want a society where workers can earn their wages in an adequate way and be able to live from it. Thank you.
Logique de marché, ça, en tout cas, c'est ce qui ressort d'essentiel pour nos panélistes.
So this is the main aspect for our panelists. We should try and improve modes, networks, avoid degrading both working conditions and wages. However, in any collective negotiation, we should try and improve our working conditions and wages. I would like to turn to South America, to Argentina in particular, and ask Hugo.
Comment est la situation d'abord chez lui, on te salue Hugo, et puis peut-être aller dans un autre secteur qui est celui de la...
I'd like to ask him what the situation is.
Hello, dear colleagues. It is a great pride for the CTA-T from Argentina to be present here today. Our country is also living the world trends in the transport sector and also in the plight of the working class to try and eradicate the neoliberal paradigm that we have been suffering, particularly in our country, for the last 30 years. Up until the decade of the 90s, the rail transport, sea transport, and air transport in Argentina were state-owned, public-owned companies that were not exclusive. These companies were the ones carrying out this service. After the neoliberalism of the 90s, we saw that this was sold away, and there was a frontal attack against the workers of the transport sector. This had a very big impact on a country like Argentina, the 8th biggest country in the world, according to territory. And the result, unfortunately, meant that most of the transport for the internal transport was carried out through trucks and lorries. 90% was carried out through trucks and lorries on road transport. And road transport, 2/3 of public transportation in Argentina, was carried out by the other more contaminating and polluting, which was air flight. This meant that trains were done away with, and also our ships, and as a worker from the aeronautic sector, I have to say that we were part of the fight to get back our airline. We managed at the beginning of the 21st century with Néstor and Cristina Kirchner in the government. But then we we saw Mauricio Macri have a neoliberal government again, and we went back. There was a lot of work to try to revert this model. Fortunately, now we have a new model that is more at the service of the people and the interests of the country. This is what we can see today. We see that we have a very strong fight to get back the state, to guarantee transportation, not only as a lucrative model, but also as something very important to our countries. It is a public service, and it also is a strategic factor for each and every one of our countries. It is a factor that helps with sovereignty for national and regional integration with other countries too. It is a factor to develop the most far away and isolated areas in each country. So our fight to defend the interests of the workers in the transportation sector is also a fight in favor of a model of a country, a model of society that is completely the opposite of the neoliberal model. We are currently trying to get back the railway transportation sector. We are trying to give they're trying to give a big support to the air transport that has been very affected by the pandemic. And they're also trying to get back the national maritime transportation that had been done away with and was under the flags of convenience of other countries. They are trying to get it back. The transnational defense of the Argentinian flag for internal river navigation and also external navigation. While this is going on, the workers in the sector are being subject to a triple attack, a triple threat. Well, as everybody knows in the world, due to the effects of the pandemic to begin with, but also because the transport sector, the air transport sector, has accepted commitments on a national, international level for a industrial transformation to fight greenhouse gas emissions. And well, the owners of the industrial sector are trying to put this on the shoulders of the workers, that working class pays yet again for this transformation. And thirdly, the business and the corporate strategies want to have even more work flexibility, even more precarity, sub-recruiting, and on different companies. We are fighting this triple threat constantly, and for us, this plight is related to finding our sector workers and also finding the fights of our working class in favor of a new model of society, a new paradigm that is aligned with the SDGs in the UN, or the just transition towards a different kind of society. This is what the unions defend. And this is also very important at the ILO. Thanks to this political change, we have been able to get back our bargaining powers through collective bargaining agreements. And for us, this is the main guarantee for social dialogue. that will not have the working class as mere spectators of this process, but that will have them take part of the decision-making process. Thank you so much for inviting me and for having me take the floor. And thank you for helping me show our viewpoint that shows that the fight of the working class is really related to the political fight of the working class in general. Thank you.
Merci, gracias, Hugo. Merci pour ce témoignage. C'est vrai que l'Argentine est un pays qui a eu, on va dire, des grands coups de balancier.
Thank you very much. Yes, you've been going right and left in Argentina. I think there is hope in your country because you're getting out of the liberal paradigm, and you should improve modes of transport and working conditions in your struggle, which is an international one, because what happens in Argentina and Ukraine has to do with all of us, wherever we are on the planet. Now, I'd like to give the floor to our colleagues to see whether they have reactions, any feedback. Pablo Futos from the Comisiones Obreras in Spain, in particular on the road sector, and a struggle against false sole traders
Pablo n'est pas avec nous.
and independent workers. Oh, Pablo is not here. Pablo, are you there?
Alors, une question. Ah si, Pablo, voilà, je vois que pas Pablo.
I see that Pablo is coming.
Réagir.
Hola, buenos días.
Would you like to react to what I've said?
Este es compañero Rafael García, que está también presente.
Rafael Garcia was the one that was going to take the floor on this topic. He's also present here. This morning, I sent you an email saying that there was going to be a last-minute change, and I am hoping that he can take the floor.
Well, in
order to have a wider opinion and the confederal position of Comisiones Obreras, what's happening in the road transport sector in Spain. And maybe later we'll come back to Rafael to talk about the train transport sector.
Yes, the
situation of road transport in Spain. Well, we need to have a change of model in this road freight. This is carried out in Spain mostly by road transportation. And in this sector, we also have a very important communication by the workers. This is making the sector and the working conditions for the employees in that sector, well, their conditions are being deteriorated more and more. We need to have a change to a just transition for freight road transport, and it needs to go also to rail transport. We are having this debate in our trade union to see how we can face this transition.
Merci, Pablo.
Thank you, Pablo. We have a question on the chat from Guillaume. He's asking whether social dumping is only in air transport or sea transport. I'd like to turn to Frédéric. Thank you. Thank you for your question, Guillaume.
Bien entendu,
This is true for whole modes of transport. The consequences of social dumping appeared first in the sea transportation sector because there is an international law there, but it happens also in the road sector, road transport sector, both for urban transportation and also railways. And it's the end of monopolies which existed in France, which has led to increased competition and increased competition among employees. So from that point of view, social dumping exists for all modes of transports, I would say. It exists among workers and among the different modes of transport. And at the end, there is the question of the general interest, which is the basis of society within a country or within the planet. And this disappears in the interest of shareholders. And we can't agree with these logics, with this rationale. This is why today we are saying in CGT that we need to ask the questions of public service, of state control on transport modes, and to take transports out of the private markets. Transport is strategic, indeed. It gives value both to goods, but also to other segments of society from a cultural or a touristic point of view. So if it gives added value in trade, well, it should benefit the employees who take part in the generation of value, of wealth. In our forum today, we will also deal with the financing issues, but we do have proposals in this field. How should we take into account modes of transport which are more user-friendly and more respectful of the environment? But what are the commitments made by us, by companies, in order to increase research and development, in order to consume less energy? Because in the end, transport will always need some kind of energy. Fossil energies are producing more greenhouse gases right now, road transport basically, but we do have the possibility to avoid environmental dumping, so to speak, by using other modes of transport. And at the same time, we should see whether we can improve other modes of transport, which are polluting right now, but which will be more respectful of the environment tomorrow. So these questions of social and environmental dumping have to do with all modes of transport, but we also need all these modes of transport. We shouldn't get rid of one transport in particular. Those that are polluting should have a lower share than today, and we should give priority to less polluting modes of transport. That's the basis. And then we should address new technologies to make the most of them in order to produce fewer greenhouse gases tomorrow in the future. And this is something we can share. And this will be part of the questions that we will have to deal with today.
Tu as bien résumé un peu cette table ronde.
Yes, Frederick, you summarized this round table, and we now can pass on to the next question related to social dumping. And
I'd like to clarify something, because I don't know if I heard it correctly. I'd like to clarify something, if you allow me.
Pablo, do you wish to say something?
From Comisiones. I'd like to clarify something.
On a une seconde question, mais on la prendra un peu plus tard.
We have a second check question, but we will deal with it later. on the different topics. So I was saying for the social dumping and the international struggles, we have an example on the continent, and here I would like to talk.
Sénégal et cette lutte pour préserver la voie entre Bamako et Dakar. Alors je salue les collègues qui sont présents avec nous, Mamantienta, Moussa et notre collègue sénégalais.
Our colleagues Mamantia and Sunta should be with us too. I would like to give the floor to Siamta Moussa. I don't know who's going to talk, to take the floor first, to talk about this struggle for the railroad between Bamako and Dakar. Siamta, would you like to take the floor first? Yes, thank you very much. I'm here with my colleague, and I'm really sorry, but the sound from Africa is awful. There's very little we can do about that.
Ouais, je pense qu'on doit pas.
I'm sorry. We don't hear.
Hello?
Yes. Oh, now we have a Larsen effect.
Je pense qu'il y a deux appareils d'allumés et il faut en éteindre un. Vous avez deux appareils parce que je vois deux écrans d'allumés. Voilà.
So,
allez-y, je pense que c'est mieux là.
Please take the floor now, Tienta, but your mic's off.
Oui. C'est la technique. Alors, il faut remettre le son.
Le son.
Et voilà, on vous entend mieux maintenant.
Non, on ne vous entend pas mieux. Je suis. I'm sorry, we can't work with this kind of sound.
Il faut vous éteigner un des deux ordinateurs, oui. Oui, vas-y, essaye.
Oui.
Et maintenant, il y a de l'écho.
Ouais.
Non. Écoutez, ouais, je vous propose de régler les problèmes de son et on va peut-être passer à un
We'll
autre
try
sujet.
to solve the sound issues and pass on to another topic, and we will come back to you, Ms. Tienta, when as soon as you have solved the sound issues. We could maybe talk about another example of international cooperation, which is on the European continent. I would like to talk now with David Onez from the Railroad Workers Trade Union, and the situation in Spain with the SNCF investing in a low-cost branch in Spain. And afterwards, we will ask to Rafael Garcia from Comisiones Obreras to develop on what's going on with this branch of SNCF in Spain. Thank you, David. So indeed, the CGT Federation of Railroad Workers, CGT Cheminots, is very deeply honored to participate to this debate and salutes you warmly. As David said in his presentation, SNCF, the French railroad company, is very active in social dumping, organizing competition in the world, and it starts, of course, in Europe. We learned very recently that SNCF had created a low-cost company, and this is to reply to what Hugo said on the low-cost principles. SNCF is investing 600 million euros in Spain to create a branch, Linsfera, which has been renamed Ouigo Spain, and is in competition today with Renfe and organizing social dumping in Spain. Through this cooperation and the links that we have with Comisiones Obreras, we were able to share our thoughts on the situation well ahead of time in order to be able to organize a reaction, not only in France, but also in Spain, because we are totally opposed for an idea that would allow social dumping to become everywhere present in English. We are cooperating also with the ETF in Europe and also with ITF, because no matter where we go, the switching to the private sector is something we want to fight in transport, and to us it is extremely, we need to organize and maybe even consider to go on strike together, because when we end up in such a situation that is questioning the principle of the use of the railroads with the consequences it can have on the organization of transport. We all know what happened with the liberalization process on freight railroads. In France, we passed from 50 billion tons per kilometer to less than 20 billion tons kilometer, and the road has taken over the biggest part of this transport. So this topic is transnational, and to us, in particular through the European Committee, we try to act and fight this kind of situations. And now I will give the floor to my dear comrade. Thank you, David, for presenting the situation of a multinational company like SNCF and how this company is always looking for shares, market shares, and turns to social dumping to achieve its goals. I would like to turn to Daniel. We should have gone to Spain altogether and meet there and talk with the workers of Uyghur Spain. However, the health situation didn't allow us to do so, but we hope we will be able to do so very soon. But we already achieved one thing the SNCF wanted to have. It's tailored trade union set up for that, and Spanish government was against it because the federations had not been consulted on that topic. So, Rafael, could you maybe give us your insights on that?
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of you for your participation and send you fraternal greetings to all of you, especially to the colleagues that I met in Paris and the ones I met last year. As you're very well mentioning, liberalization in Spain made us see the arrival of Uyghur in 2019 in Spain. And Uyghur is the low-cost company derived from, it's a daughter company from SNCF. And so they started competing at national level in Spain as soon as they came. And this happened in May, in the month of May last year. Trade unions in Spain tried to organize elections as soon as we visited the company. We were aware of the fact that they were trying to organize fake elections. They were trying to include a yellow trade union representative in their list, so a person that was appointed by the company. We tried to fight against this process, and it's still being resolved at this point. For the arrival of Ouigo in Spain will very strongly disrupt the train sector. As other colleagues were pointing out, other comrades spoke about the fast pace at which liberalization is arriving all around Europe. But Spain has a progressive government in power. They started a year and a half ago. They arrived a year and a half ago, but it's true that they've been speaking about diverse labor reforms that have been started by the right-wing governments that preceded them, but haven't taken clear decisions. And of course, this affects collective agreements. We are trying for the collective agreements for the train transport sector to become a reality. We would like for it to be applied to all of the transport companies in Spain. We hope for there to be decent work conditions. We always defend work associated with the rights of the workers. But we are still pending the changes to the labor law. And so we find ourselves in this situation where this French company is coming with Ouigo that has conditions that are far lower than the ones that we had in Renfe, the main train company in Spain, and then Adif, the main infrastructure company. So we very strongly depend on the political decisions that will have to be taken in Spain. We, as trade unions, try to join forces with different interest groups. We try to pressure political representatives so that they pass this law reform, because otherwise we won't have sufficient collective agreements. In 2022, we might see this with Trenitalia, another company that decided to join forces with ILSA, an Italian company, and a Spanish company joining forces. And it's quite possible that they also try and compete with Spain with much lower working conditions. So this will be an important problem, a very serious problem that we're going to have to face head on, because otherwise we won't get anywhere. We need a joint response. I thought what David Danet was pointing out very interesting. An international strike would be interesting in this respect, because it's true that the train sector was protected for many years from social dumping, but now we find ourselves in this situation where it's, you know, it's being it was hidden behind the door, and now it's inside the house. So with regard to social dumping, this is all the information I can give you. I can also give you information on our ecological transition. I can also do, but just let me know, David. Thank you.
De tous nos camarades. En tout cas, merci.
We'll try to talk with all the comrades. Thank you, Raphael. We will come back to you on other topics later on. But indeed, there's a common statement, a joint statement between CGT and Comisiones Obreras that is being prepared to inform the French and Spanish workers of what's going on in Spain and how the historical operators are organizing social dumping through branches. We are going to react, of course. We start already, and we will fight to obtain satisfaction for our claims. I would like to turn to back to Bamako. I will give the floor back to Tienta for this international fight, because it involved the International Federation of the Transport Worker and CGT in a common action with our Senegalese and Malian colleagues on the line, Bamako, Dakar. Do you hear me correctly now? Yes, now things seem to be working better. Thank you very much. And please let me start by thanking CGT and CDF. And hello, David Goe and all the Federation of the Railroad Workers at CGT in France. We know what efforts you put in this meeting, and it's fantastic. I'm here with my accomplice, Moussa Kita. He will give you the big lines of what's going on with the railroads here. As you know, the railroads in Mali are totally blocked. The authorities in our country have decided to interrupt the concession for the line between Bamako and Mali, and the problem is not solved so far. And since 2018, 2019, the situation hasn't been deblocked at all. It's a problem that is still present, and today we really will need to reestablish this relationship between Mali and Senegal. And the absence of this line is dramatic for the population and the villages that are along the line. With the rural exodus, young people are crossing, trying to cross borders over slug boats. And the youngsters start fleeing to Europe, and you all know what this has as consequences. And those that remain here are the old people that have to do the work of the young people. And all the villages that are crossed by the rails are in a very difficult situation. If I take the city of Kutu, these cities are living thanks to the railway, and as the train is not connecting these cities anymore, the people are economically in a very hard situation. I'm not going to talk about the competition between road transportation and railroad transportation, but there are approximately 5,300 operators of the containers that are waiting in the harbor of Dakar to be shipped. And 96% of the fuel coming from Dakar is transported to us. So today, the interruption of the line will need to be must be dealt with commonly between Senegal and Mali. And as long as this cooperation is not arranged, the trains that are leaving the harbor of Dakar will not be able to feed our country. As long as this concession is blocked, we won't be able to do anything. And when we met Mr. Sarginal from the CGT, that we thank and for his commitment, he promised us that he was going to work through the French Railroad Workers Federation so that the line with Dakar would reopen. I'm now going to give the floor to my friend Moussa Kita, who is going to tell you what is really happening on the floor in Bamako.
Hello. This is the representative of SESTEM in Mali. You've heard the presentation from my comrade, and I could tell you that the line has always been a dual nationality. This is a heritage from the colonizers, and this is something that was given to the history of man. When I think of railway transition in this corridor, I remember the resistance carried out by African railway men in 1938 by indigenous people. There was a struggle, 8 workers were killed, 154 casualty, seriously injured. The image and sound froze, sorry. So I could talk about the resistance and the struggles waged by the indigenous people and the local communities, so that equal work with equal pay. This was our struggle, and we needed 5 months and 10 days of a bloody struggle, which ended up with equal pay for indigenous people in the Dakar-Niger railways. So it was a major strike. This was led by Ivory, a Senegalese, who had just finished his study. He was a train conductor and led this movement to defend the interests of the African indigenous people, who carried out 70 or 80% of the physical work on this railway line. Remember, we were talking about steam machines at the time. So these people have suffered a lot, very much, for this Dakar-Bamako corridor to be set up after independence. The sound is not very good, we're sorry. So this railway link was created in Mali, in Senegal. They used nature, deforestation, in order to make these steam machines work, in order to get wood and coal, because these steam machines work with water pressure. So we Africans destroyed nature in the first stages of this operation in order to set up this transportation mode. So there was a lot of CO2 which was produced at the times. Now our transport modes emit fewer gases, less than in the Western world, because in the Western world, trains use electricity, hydrogen, and other resources, whereas in Africa, we are still using fuel, oil, for our trains. And we use diesel or gasoline fuels that produce and generate CO2. This is why we would like to see transportation corrected, improved in Africa. If you have a train with 1,000 passengers over 1,000 kilometers, for example, and if each passenger used his own vehicle, we would have 1,000 vehicles, which over 1,000 kilometers would produce lots of greenhouse gases. So today, we see that railways generate fewer CO2 emissions than other transport modes, in particular in Africa compared to Europe. And sincerely, railways should be improved, both in the Western Hemisphere, but also in Africa, so that we turn the page of colonization, which dates back a whole century. This started in 1952. We are now in 2021, so it's almost a century. And imagine the number of greenhouse gases and CO2 emissions. And as we know that nature has no borders, well, railways men should be sent to Glasgow and take part in the remediation measures that will be decided in Glasgow. We should also do reforestation in Africa, in Sahel, because desertification is really, really getting very bad. We get 50 degrees sometimes in that part of the world. And to some extent, railway men have been responsible for that. Microphone, please. So much for what I hope to be able to speak longer later on. Thank you. Thank you, Moussa and Tienta, for your explanations. You quote Moussa Samen and his novel, Les Bouts de Dieu, which I invite everyone to read. And this struggle dating back to 1948 for equal pay for equal work. It is true that the binational railway company from Mali and Senegal is an example of a binational company, and it was privatized. Social dumping is introduced. There is no maintenance of infrastructure of the rolling stock. Wages are not paid anymore. There was a terrible strike with a few people who were killed, and absolutely dramatic situations for their relatives, the families. Without international solidarity from CGT and others from a financial point of view, but not only that, well, we also contacted all institutions in Senegal and Mali for this particular line to be reopened. We have a project for this. Obviously, with COVID, everything was suspended. It was difficult. We also have links with the World Bank. So this is an example of international solidarity, which is not only financial, it is very tangible, very concrete, and we're very proud of having taken part in this struggle, which is not over. We will continue supporting you. When things open up, we will go to Bamako and we will try and speed up everything. I see that Pablo raised his hand, but I wanted to give the floor to John first, unless you want to talk on Mali and Senegal, Pablo. What do you want to talk about? Otherwise, I'll give the floor to John. I think he had something to present together with Hugo.
Thank you. It's very late at night here, so I'm getting very tired, so I won't speak for very long. Pablo and I were thinking about the common factor that our countries share, in that we are relatively small economies and a long way from the centers of global decision making. from the perspective of New Zealand and New Zealand unions, this underlines the need for international solidarity, and so consequently we participate enthusiastically in international bodies such as the ITF. I think, though, that another aspect of our remoteness, particularly in New Zealand, is that New Zealand has considerable soft power that comes from our relatively positive international image. And so we have a reputation for being something of a social laboratory. In the 1930s, we developed a comprehensive welfare state that certainly in the Anglo-Saxon world was seen as a model. And then in the 1980s, we went to the other end of the political spectrum and became a social laboratory for a form of neoliberalism. So although we're a small country and we are remote, we sometimes can wield influence that belies our size and the distance from global decision making. When it comes to dealing with climate change and climate system breakdown and affecting a just transition for workers and protecting workers from the impacts of social dumping and the negative impacts of climate change and climate system breakdown, for New Zealanders, the comradeship and international solidarity of people such as yourselves and representing workers across the world is invaluable. And we only hope that in the RMTU in New Zealand that we, in a small way, can also contribute. Much of this is symbolic, much of it is moral, but we have a saying in New Zealand that when you're in a fight and you find out that you had a friend that you never knew you had, because you receive a message from a comrade in Norway or a comrade in Chile or a comrade in France, then that is invaluable. And I'll now give the floor to my comrade, Ugo.
Ouais, tu peux passer direct.
Sí, quería aportar que
I wanted to add something. When we had the colleague from the ETF, our trade union works on our international fights through ITF. We think that the internationalization of the working class is fundamental. It is extremely important in this moment of globalization, extreme transnationalization of the ownership and management of transport companies all over the world. And this is why we have international solidarity, and it's so important, international solidarity among workers. I was amazed by the presentation of our comrade from Comisiones Obreras that the low-cost companies are now trying to find their space in the rail sector. This is something that is unimaginable in our country and that we still haven't seen, and we hope it never happens. The intention of the last neoliberal government was to continue dismantling the whole transport infrastructure that was not road transport, and the advancement of transnational private companies in all transportation modes. Fortunately, the working class fight helped us avoid this process and helped us strengthen our coordination between workers. We are fighting for the transnational cooperation of workers towards a new model. As the comrades from other countries have said, we have seen social dumping between workers. The business sector and their representatives try to do with the society, with the users of that transport, as if those low-cost companies were helping democratize air transport. One minister said it was even the revolution of airfare, because it was going to help dismantle the state-owned business and it was going to be replaced by more efficient companies or enterprises. This is the fight we are all facing. Through the ITF, we know this is a common fight for all workers. It is very worrying to know that in the other modes of transport, we see there is a similar process. This strengthens our conviction that the fight, the workers' fight, is a political fight. We need to strengthen our alliances with other social sectors. We need to avoid infighting between workers. We need to work with other enterprises, and this fight between users of and the workers, but many times they're also workers, but they end up buying this neoliberal policy. We need to fight this as workers, turning it into a national fight too. In some ways we have managed during the neoliberal government, when we were able to keep our airline 100% state-owned. The company managing our airports is also 100% state-owned, and the parts plant is also 100% owned, state-owned. This was not something that occurred naturally. This was due to the workers' fight. We are trying to make this fight international to have a new model of society. Thank you so much.
Merci, John and Hugo.
Thank you, John and Hugo. It's true that the international cooperation is important. We're saluted by somebody that joined us, and it's important because when you receive a message of solidarity from a small island like New Zealand, that's very nice. Thank you again, warmly, John, for your participation. Before giving the floor to Jean-Philippe for the maritime sector, I would like maybe to turn to Vladimir in Ukraine. We also have an international solidarity organized. The ITF is going to organize a seminar next week with the Ukrainian comrades to deal with different privatization and renationalization examples in different countries. And during our preparatory sessions, you also mentioned the difficulties you had to keep your railroad workers, that there was a lot of migration to the European Union, particularly to Poland. Could you please elaborate on this?
Right, of course, I will tell you all about it. I will go back to what I've been saying because I haven't finished, because I would like to tell you what our state is doing with railways. Because, you know, the railway belongs to the state and the shares belong to the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. What they want to do is to split it into 3 companies. Can you hear me? Right, so they want to split it into 3 companies, one for passenger transport, one for technical, and a third one for the infrastructure. So they want to privatize the first 2 parts, so the passenger and the business, because they mean money. And the infrastructural company, meaning the tracks and the communications, they will remain in the state ownership. And of course, we are against it. The point is that our country is at war. We have thousands of soldiers at Donbass, and you need to equip the soldiers, you need to bring the food products, because you are aware of the situation in Ukraine, and if a private party comes to the market, it will all collapse. What I'm trying to say is that we're all for the electrical modes of transport. Over 80% of our rail stock in Ukraine are electrical. So the diesel-run locomotives are being phased out. During the Soviet time, the electrification of the tracks was widespread. So we do believe that the electrical power should be commercialized. Also in the urban means of transport, public transport like trams and buses. Our trade union represent also workers from the metro, because it is environmentally friendly, it should be clean, and this is the way it should be in the state. Talking about migration. Well, the wages are quite low in Ukraine. Everybody knows about that. This is really our headache. This is really our pain. And you probably hear about that. And a lot of workers leave for Germany and for Poland because the wages are higher there. So the migration is a fact. And we all know that within the EU, people migrate as well. And those who leave are usually the best specialists and professionals. And I believe that this is unacceptable. I believe that our people should work in our home country and the wages should be raised. We as trade unions will keep fighting for that. And you know, our people do understand that their life wouldn't be better abroad. You could better stay in the place where you have been born and raised. This is all I had to say. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Merci, merci Vladimir, effectivement.
Thank you, Vladimir. Indeed, if the wages were better, workers would remain in their country. As you said, it's very often the more specialized workers that are migrating, and therefore the national railroads are getting impoverished. Let's move to another industry now, the maritime transport, and we will go to Korea with Sungi. The maritime transportation is a mode of transport. It is probably more exposed to social dumping than any other mode of transport. Jean-Philippe, I give you the floor. Thank you to all of you, comrades. Thank you for your participation. I've been navigating for 32 years on all the seas all over the world. Now I'm retired, but with CGT, I still I'm helping all the marine workers in all the international organizations, OIT, ETF, and ETF. So maritime transport represents 90% of the freight transport in the world, but most of the ships are wearing a compliance flag, which are using Liberia, Panamanian, Marshall Islands, Cyprus, Malta, in order to reduce the taxes and to avoid trade union work to defend their interests of the workers, in order to increase the income for the capital and having the lowest income for the workers. This is what happens with capitalists. This kind of tactics exist since 1934 and have been increasing ever since. Normally, the MLC of the OIT in 2006 should have regulated the working conditions as for work, time, etc. But the minimum wages of the OIT is $640 for a marine workers. There are approximately 2 million marine workers, and 2/3 of them come from the Southeast Asia, and which are giving a lot of marine workers. COVID was a catastrophe for this sector. Approximately 400,000 workers were blocked on board of their ships, which means 800,000 workers that need to get off and get on board because of harbors being closed, and when it was impossible to have the workers getting out of their ships, these would be put in quarantine for 10 to 14 days before a shift could be changed. The UMI and the OIT and the organizations have asked that the maritime workers be considered essential workers and be prioritized for vaccinating. Nothing was done, especially in France, where this doesn't seem to be a problem for President Macron. But you must realize that if maritime freight was stopped, there all the shops would be with shortages, which would have serious social consequences. The shipyards have now included clauses that prohibit any changes of shifts. So we are getting back to situations of slavery, and the maritime people may be separated from their families for years. In the latest meeting, according to on wages, no agreement could be reached because the owners of the ships were opposed to it, in spite of all the profit that these companies made, like Maersk and Shofco, etc. You must realize that the container going from Shanghai to Europe cost $2,500, and in November 2018, the same container was costing $800 US. Amendments should have been introduced during the last of the OIT in order to guarantee a maximum of 11 months on board with 11 months on board with a return to their home country after 12 months. But the meeting was displaced to 2022, and this barrier of 11 months by the shipment companies want already avoid this possibility. Now, there's an Italian commander that died on board. All the Asian countries were refusing the onboarding of this commander or his captain, and the captain had to return to his port of origin to onboard the captain. The same thing was true for Romanian captain, and no country is allowing the ship to get in the harbor in order to onboard the captain. As I say, slavery is back. Thank you, Jean-Philippe, for this testimony of the situation of the maritime sector, which has been especially struck by the COVID crisis and the international solidarity of the maritime workers. But transport is also a matter for the populations, and the users must have a right to mobility. This is something we wanted to discuss, starting with Korea, with our comrade of KPTU. KPTU Sugi is going to explain us the situation and how South Korea is confronted to this problem. So you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. I'm Song Hee-oh from the Korean Public Service and Transport Workers Union. We are affiliated to the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, and we are the largest industrial union in the KCTU. Let me go to my presentation then. Starting with an order from the then president under the military regime in 1984, free ride policy for the metro system for the elderly over age 65 and disabled was introduced, and the policy keeps operating as a part of social welfare policies in 6 major cities. Later on, as the policy goes on, relevant laws and regulations were adjusted in the courses. Among the 6 cities, I would like to talk about the situation in Seoul. According to Seoul Metro, the accumulated loss for free transportation policy from 2017 to 2020 was $1.1 billion. In 2020, the loss was $230 million. When you look at the rate of use of free transportation in 2019, it was 80.7% for the elderly, 18% for the disabled, and 1.3% for those of national merit. And it is predicted that the rate of the elderly use will be increasing due to demographic changes. In the case of Seoul, which has been 30 years since the opening of the metro service, there is a high risk of safety. It is because due to the deficit caused by the free ride policy, the old facilities have not been replaced in a timely manner in a situation where reinvestment and management of aging facilities is required. In fact, the Seoul Metropolitan Government and the corporation have been requesting subsidies from the state government for the loss from the implementation of the free ride policy for a long time. The KPTU Seoul Metro Union also has urged the implementation of the national responsibility for maintaining public transportation because the free transportation system needs to be maintained in terms of public service obligation, demanding that the government should subsidies for urban railways through amendment of the relevant laws. In a situation where local authorities have difficulty in financial capacity, such as low fare rates and structural limitations in which the proportion of national taxes is much higher than taxes go to local authorities, and the need to provide the local level public welfare services increases, it is difficult or almost impossible to afford financial support to compensate the loss only at the local government level. The city of Seoul provided $50 million to Seoul Metro as an emergency financial support on 29th of April this year in order to compensate for some of the loss caused by free transportation for the elderly and disabled. It is my personal thought, and it is hard to tell with certainty whether it was the effect of the recent change of the mayor to a conservative party. The city authority also urged the corporation to prepare and implement intensive self-help measures when it injected the emergency financial support to the corporation. Currently, the KPTU Seoul Metro Union and the management are in the process of 2021 collective bargaining, and the management presented a restructuring plan that included a plan to reduce the workforce of 1,539 in the negotiations on 8th of June, and negotiations are currently at a deadlock. The main contents of the restructuring proposed by the management are as follows. 1, change of work arrangement. 2, improvement of work efficiency. 3, reduction of manpower through outsourcing of some tasks. 4, reduction of welfare benefits. 5, deterioration of wage system, such as expansion of performance-based salary system for senior positions and change of wage peak system through expansion of the period and of reduction rate. In response, the KPTU Seoul Metro Union condemned the restructuring plan that it is shifting responsibility to workers while ignoring the nature of the financial difficulties, and it prepares to mobilize members when the restructuring plan is forced. It also carries out a campaign to strengthen the publicness of public transport system by putting pressure on the National Assembly to amend the relevant laws to enable the state government to provide financial support for the loss of free transportation in metro services. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Sugi, for this very interesting testimony on the urban transport in Seoul. I remember that for the metro, there was a very important fight with Transdev, a French multinational. And this is important and is something that was done to meet the needs of population that needs to move around in a big city like Seoul. Let's change the scale now, and let's go to a smaller city than a smaller density of population. And we'll be talking about Mali. The suppression of the Bamako-Dakar line was a real catastrophe for the people, because the people needed to abandon their profession. There was a lot of migration. Maybe Tienta or Musa, could you elaborate a bit on this? And then we will listen to Pablo. Do not hesitate to raise your hand if you want to say something, or say something in the chat. Hello? Do you hear me? I will simply explain how we got to the situation where we are. As I said, I'm with Musa here, and we saw that the railroad line would be interrupted, and it seems like Tienta has been interrupted too.
Depuis 2004, c'est pourquoi nous nous sommes retrouvés, et Moussa et moi, Moussa étant un conducteur de train et moi étant dans les ateliers, on connaît la température ferroviaire du Mali et du Sénégal.
My brother was train conductor and I worked in the offices, so we know what happens both in Mali and in Senegal. Can you follow me? The image was frozen, sound was frozen as well for some time. Can you follow me? Yes, we can hear you. Très bien. So we did wage this battle. We informed the authorities of both countries. I was fired. So this struggle was to keep this mythical railway line, as Moussa explained. And there was a lot of blood shed for the construction of the railways. And this line has been stopped for 3 years now. And we stayed 9 months without being paid, without receiving any wages. And we ended up with a hunger strike. We lost 10 of our comrades. And when CGT came to Bamako, you met some of the relatives, some of the families. So the railway line is still stopped. And I think that Mali and Senegal society are suffering. Everything is expensive, and Mali is suffering because there is no transportation of goods with this railway line. We are landlocked. Everything is stopped. If you go to different cities in Mali, there is no activity. So several regions are completely stopped. There is no activity. When there is no railway line, it is the end for the Malian economy. It's very difficult. We've set up a group of Mali and Senegal railway men against the stoppage of the train, but the train is stopped. The railway line is not working. So we are waging this battle. We are fighting, and it's a decision that was taken by the Malian state. And we want this double nationality to come back, to be granted again to the railway line, because Senegal cannot do anything without Mali. We are complementary, I think. Dear comrades, Tienta just explained the situation of railway men in Senegal and Mali. Bandwidth is insufficient, we can't hear.
C'était la catastrophe sur le plan outil de production, catastrophe chez les hommes.
So it was a tragedy both for the production tools and men, human resources. But CGT supported us, and they are still supporting us for this corridor to be open again. We are talking to the highest authorities of the country about reopening this railway line. We would like to hear the whistle of the train. Yesterday, this group of trade unions and associations was received by the legislative body after hearing a presentation on the fact that this double nationality is a must if we are looking for increased integration, better economic results. Image froze again. The sound too. But the policy was to pay millions of francs to resurface roads for trucks, but nothing was done to change our rolling stock. We need to change the mentality. We need increased railway investments. We can't be managed like trucks or buses. And we want hundreds of billions or tens of billions of francs to have a railway line which will not need any maintenance during 50 years. And Mali has paid 40 billion francs for 10 kilometers of road, whereas since 2017, nothing was paid to maintain our railway lines. And this is why the train was stopped. It is not working now. But the company has not been liquidated. The general administration is working with their papers, but Mali is out.
Basé sur le voyageur et oublier le fret, le Mali a 7 millions.
You can't base a railway line on transport of passengers and not on goods.
On pourra pas désengorger le port de Dakar. Donc,
and we won't be able to find enough outlets for the port of Dakar with the road only. We need a railway line. And we want to be able to resume this line before December 31st, 2021. And I'd like to seize this opportunity to send you the greetings of the women workers of these railway lines.
Que sa famille nourrissait ses enfants et les foyers à travers ses propres efforts. Je vais vous ouvrir une parenthèse. Cette brave dame, cette Amazone, en 1900.
And one of these women in 1947, in order to feed her children, had to sacrifice animals to give to feed her children. So in order to finish my intervention, I would like to ask once more for your support so that road and railway investments are balanced in Africa. We don't understand why the state gives 5 billion francs for roads, which are totally degraded after 5 years, whereas they don't give anything to the railway. We can't hear. I mean, sorry, but the bandwidth is so poor, we can hardly hear. Thank you very much for this moving declaration. It is true that the region you were mentioning is northeast of Mali. It has suffered a great deal because this railway line was closed. The population decided to migrate. Some professions and trades just disappeared because they existed thanks to the railway line. And some economies just collapsed. You also reminded us of the present political situation in Mali, second coup. So we hope that the situation gets back to normal as soon as possible. Ministers are appointed today, and the Minister of Transport will be in charge of deciding what happens with transport, which is road transport mainly, so much more expensive for the situation. We met with the female minister at the time, and she told us that since the suppression of this railway line, the transport budget had doubled. We're talking about billions of CFA francs. It's not that it's peanuts, but we're not talking about dollars or euros. Okay, thank you, Moussa, and see you soon. I'd like to go back to Spain. I think that Pablo Rafael may want to take the floor on the situation in Spain, and then we'll close this particular session with Fabrice Michaud, who will speak about the situation in Amazon. So I give the floor to Pablo, I think. Pablo? Comisiones Obreras.
We unfortunately cannot hear Pablo. He has not turned on his microphone, or his microphone is not working, because we unfortunately cannot hear Pablo. We cannot hear him at all.
¿Ahora? ¿Se me oye? Vale, bueno.
Can you hear me now? Yes, now we can hear him. I wanted to apologize for my first intervention. I couldn't hear very well, and I think I only answered one part of the question you addressed to me. In Spain, in general, and transport, we have carried out several studies to see how the transportation sector is developing. We need to have a legislation, we need to set some order in Spain. It is known that much has been invested in airports that have not been used. A lot of money has been invested also in high-speed trains, and this has not answered the needs of the working class. And that is also helping the population going to the main cities and then abandoning the rural areas. From Comisiones Obreras, we think we need to work exactly on the opposite, not invest so much in roads, but we need to invest in different kinds of train transport and train transport for passengers to be able to better integrate different territories. We are facing a new challenge. The aviation sector that was very polluting, how cheap it was to go on the plane now. And we see the same thing is happening in the sea sector. We see there's more vacation tourism with big ships. That is contributing to worse conditions, is contributing to pollution. And we see this is happening. The social dumping is also happening here. For us, it is very important to defend decent working conditions. Some comrades have already said that we need to give information on transport, how we use it. We need, I think also that in trade unions and the users and the consumers of this service, because, well, the low cost airlines means that there is low wages and there is not enough knowledge on what using this kind of transportation means in the end. This implies worse working conditions for workers in the different sectors and the different transport sectors. On privatization, Rafa knows more than I do. In the rail sector, from Comisiones Obreras, we're going to have a meeting with the CGT to see how we can have common actions facing this new effort that we can see to try to privatize rail transportation for passengers. We need to say that when we talk about bad working conditions, we're not only talking about roads, but road transport, but all sectors, all transportation sectors where we see that working conditions are being worse and worse. This is all from my part. Thank you.
Merci Pablo. Est-ce que Raphaël, tu veux aussi également compléter les propos de...
Thank you, Pablo. Rafael, would you like to complete what was said by Pablo?
Sí, quería añadir unas cuestiones concretas. Espero ser breve.
I'm going to be very brief. I wanted to add some comments. I wanted to add on to what Pablo just said. We have had a chance of organizing a debate with political representatives from all parties in the Transportation Committee from the Transportation Ministry of Spain. Well, we have told them what is happening to our sector, to the rail sector in Spain. And I wanted to add on to what Pablo just said. The main issue is that we have a high-speed model that is very linked to certain economic sectors, the construction sector, for example, but they don't think about, or they didn't think about where citizens really needed the transportation. So the rail model was organized thinking about the businesses and not so much the people. We have some hope. We are hopeful. We need to see how the resilience funds can help us revert the investment that had been done in high speed and see more investment in transportation systems that help to a just energetic transition. And here we have the other kind of rail transport between smaller cities, and also to have freight rail transport, to not have that many trucks and lorries. And this is, well, the great white hope that is foreseen in our plan for energy efficiency. It is also included to have transportation modes that are less polluting. And I wanted to mention and remind you of the words that Frédéric Lemaire said in the beginning of this session. We have always defended the complementarity in transport modes and not the competition. When we have responded to the competition mode, we were kind of telling capitalism that it was right, that when we don't need that, we need complementarity, not competition. And here we can also see an important coordination between administrations, social agents, and different countries. This is the main problem we are facing. As Pablo said, well, we are close to France, and we have a very good relationship, or we have the interaction of a French company, and we need to be in contact, close contact with CGT to see how we can face these new situations. This is all from my side. Thank you so much.
Raphaël, avant de me tourner vers Fabrice, je vais peut-être donner la parole.
Before giving the floor to Fabrice, maybe I could give the floor to Javier, who's is here from UGT, Spain. We've talked about solidarity, international solidarity, cooperation between modes of transport, how to meet citizens' requirements and needs, increase mobility for passengers and users. Javier, I think you're connected, so you have the floor.
Sí, hola, buenos días a todos. Hola, buenos días a todos. Estaba conectado.
Hello, good morning to all of you. I was online, but I think I was in the wrong meeting or the wrong room because I saw all of your images, but I was not able to connect as a speaker with my video. I listened to everything that was said here, and of course, UGT agrees with what you all mentioned and your arguments. I'd like to tell you more about the situation that we're facing in Spain. Something I'd like to mention before I start is that we cannot leave behind the just transition and the fight against climate change. That is clear to us because in the coming years, everything is going to be transformed. Our ways of moving around, stepping onto transports, and this is going to bring about many changes. It might create employment in some sectors, but it could distract a lot of employment in others. Coal and other energy sources are going to bring about a lot of suppressions of job positions. So we need to fight against climate change with a series of just transition measures. What have we been doing in Spain in this regards? We know that we have a lot of road transports, more than 80% of it. And of course, this affects the railway sector. We see that in railway sector, you said something from the panelists? Okay, well, anyway, as I was saying, we have problems with collective agreements and salaries in the road sector. Conditions for drivers are much worse and leave a lot to be desired, especially in the past few years. We see that a lot of companies are not paying per hour, but per kilometer. So the drivers end up driving for hours and hours in order to reach a certain number of kilometers. And of course, this affects their health. 75% of drivers are older than 50 years old. We see that a lot of young people do not feel attracted by these bad working conditions with almost no breaks at all on their working day. And in the railway sector, we see that there's public companies, ADIF and Renfe in Spain, that have a lot of drivers that are becoming old. Also, their employees in the railway sector are old, no young people. We see that a lot of the majority of users use the regional train service. So we try to defend sustainable and ecological systems. But sometimes it's not possible. We don't have sufficient funds to promote the railway transport. We see that the supports that we have from public funds is of only 4% for the regional railway. And we need to invest. We need investments. We see that conditions in Portugal and in Spain are very different from the rest of Spain. And the changes are coming along very slowly. So investment is fundamental. We will need investment. If we leave behind a lot of jobs in the railway sector, this will also have very negative consequences. So we need just transition plans. We do have certain just transition plans for the energy sector, phasing out on thermal plants and so forth, and investment in different territories. We do see that in some sectors, but why not think about other sectors that are also going to suffer, no? Like the railway sector. We always mention transport, thinking about long distance transport, but in smaller cities, we see new delivery methods that have surged thanks to e-commerce that affect transport. We talk about the sustainable and green economy, but we see jobs appearing with riders, delivery workers that are coming along with a lot of precarious work in the end. So it's jobs that are respectful of the environment, but they're not necessarily good conditions. We see that many delivery riders are considered to be self-employed, but they're false self-employed. There were several organizations that complained about this, and we have a new law that forces the companies to hire and recognize the working conditions for delivery workers. But we see that these companies are now subcontracting their workers with agreements for the courier sector, which is not the same as the conditions that we had established in collective agreements for the transport sector. And now transports for citizens has to be regulated at regional level. Trains, buses have to reach all municipal areas, all neighborhoods, because they are non-contaminating and they are the best way to get to work and get back home. And there's also another sector that we need to take into account, the car sector, vehicle sector. A lot of jobs are going to be lost. We see more than 50,000 workers being hired in Spain to make electric cars. So it takes a lot more people to make an electric vehicle than a regular vehicle, different conditions. So we'll see that some sectors are going to lose jobs. We need to have a just transition there as well. Battery factories could be another possibility, because now batteries are being made and imported from China. So just transition in every sector that could be affected in terms of employment. And we need to be very careful with agreements. As many colleagues pointed out, we need to be careful with the reform of the labor code so that negative conditions are not given more legitimacy. And that's all I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Javier, for this general overview, exhaustive overview, passing from green, from polluting to green transportation will need a just transition. You also mentioned the Uberized workers, and this will help me to pass the floor to my colleague Fabrice Michaud from the General Secretary of the Transport Federation. Fabrice, hello. Amazon has multiplied its profits during COVID, and it also struck the employees in their rights, and CGT was there to struggle against Amazon for the situation. So I'm now giving you the floor so that you give us some insights on this. And your mic should be turned on, please. Yes, right. I forgot to turn on my microphone, says Fabrice. Thank you, David. Hello to everyone. The COVID crisis had a multiplying effect on the increase of activity with in Amazon. So the question now is, must we control the growth of trade, which allows us to work on players like Alibaba or Amazon, or should we do something else? In France, we focused on the respect of the health situation with the COVID, and we were able to defend the rights of the workers of Amazon on their working condition and on the respect of the health conditions, health measures. I believe, as we very often say, together we're stronger. CGT has had a very positive initiative. So with Amazon, we embarked on a topic that we worked on with the other federations, and that is the conditioning and transport of packages. And this cooperation allows us to avoid some barriers because it allows to have a unique status for all the workers that are embarked on the same activity. And I want to react on what Korea said on transport gratuity. In France, we are confronted with the same issue. And the argument that we have is that free transport does exist. We say free access to transport, yes, but for this to be able, you need funding. And this approach is also linked to opening to competition, as we already know in France with the bus and train transport of passengers. So we also have a unique status, and we were able to work with private and public sector comrades. And when we all gather around a table, we can find common grounds that allow us to overcome problems related with wages and social benefits. When we're talking about the green transition, I was mandated by the Federation to discuss on this with several ecological organizations, and then we have to realize that even if ecologically speaking the debate is already mature, we can't say the same for the social aspects. We can't talk about ecological transition without social transition. So my question is the capitalistic system adapted to transition? When we are thinking only about profit without taking into account the needs of the workers, the economic point of view will be central before anything else. And this is something that we've been discussing with our colleagues from the railroad and the maritime sector, because with these comrades, we have a common strategy. And with the debates that we had internally, it would be interesting to have on top of that exchanges internationally speaking, especially dealing with transport as a public service. I don't know if I answered the questions that I was supposed to deal with, Mr. Chairman, but I thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you, Fabrice, for your kind words. Yes, you already presented, we already presented a series of things, cooperation between modes, the need to leave the market model, solidarity is needed in order to defend ourselves from the attacks that we're confronted with, and also how we can fight together. We also need to have an exchange on good practices. We also talked about how to involve the population, the access to mobility. You said that you were talking about it would be better to have social tariffication and not free transport. As you said, transport is never free, and this is not something that the people should believe in. Transport, like everything else, has a cost. This needs investment, and Frédéric already recalled it. And this will allow us to answer a question on the state control or public control on transport. Public investment must be important to recover the control over transport and pass from polluting to a green transportation, and also respecting the social rights of our workers. For this latest exchange, I would like to give the floor again to Sungui, and afterwards we'll listen to Jeremy Anderson from ETF. And then at Frédéric, we will listen to Frédéric Lemairer. Sungui, you have the floor. Public investment and public management of transport. Could you please talk about situation in South Korea? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As mentioned in the session 3, government funding for the public transport system is essential to strengthen public transportation for a just transition and guarantee the right to mobility. In particular, in view of the economic crisis, such as the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to strengthen public transport system in the process of transitioning to a decarbonized society, raising funds through a fare increase cannot be the right direction. The most feasible way to raise funds for public transport system would be to change the budget for expenditure so that the existing tax revenue can be used for its purpose. In the taxation system for both of the state and the local governments in Korea, transportation and logistics among budget classification items are related to public transportation. In the case of local governments, the budget for transportation increased by 113% in 2021 compared to 2019, which is the 8th highest rate of increase among 13 local government budget items. In the case of transport sector, it is characterized by a larger budget than the state government along with the social welfare and health sectors in terms of total size. There is a difference between the state and the local governments in terms of budget characteristics. In the case of the state government, most of the budget is used for the cost of installing new facilities and roads, and the local government is focusing on the cost of maintaining and operating existing transportation facilities. The problem is that the tax collected for transportation, energy, and environmental purposes is used for different purposes in the budgeting process for expenditure and does not lead to financial investment for public transport system. In the state government taxation system, there is a transportation, energy, environment tax imposed on fuels. Local governments have parking fees and traffic-inducing levies, but all of these tax revenues are not spent on financial support for strengthening public transport system. Rather, they are mainly used for road construction and facility expansion. Therefore, if the tax collected for transportation-related purposes is invested in public transport system to meet the object, it can contribute to a just transition by revitalizing public transport system and personal vehicle suppression. Meanwhile, various discussions are underway within the KPTU to respond to the climate crisis and strengthen the public nature of transportation through the connection of urban railroads, buses, and railroads, and a related research report is scheduled to be published in late June. Also, discussions are underway to adopt the Transportation Frame Act in the KPTU. Thank you.
Merci, merci Sungi. Je sais qu'il est aussi tard.
Thank you, Sungi. I know it's also very late in South Korea. Thank you for remaining with us so long. The KPTU is a trade union with which we cooperate a lot. We are members of a big section of the railroad section of ATF. The opening of railroads lines towards the north was a very difficult situation. Two Koreas that are bordered by four big powers, China, North Korea, United States, and Japan. But we do not, we hope that sooner or later we will see trains going from South to North Korea, because right now you're totally isolated and you only have air and water transport or maritime transport, but you cannot leave the country by road. And this is a very difficult situation for railroad workers and others. If you want to participate in the round table, do not hesitate to take the floor. Jeremy Anderson, I'm going to give you the floor now. You're the leader of the ITF Research Department. I will now give you the floor so you can introduce yourself. You have a couple of minutes today, so that's fine, and it's not too late for you apparently today.
Thank you, David, and thank you to the CGT for organizing this excellent conference. And as David says, my name is Jeremy Anderson. I am the head of research at the ITF, and I'm also leading the ITF Sustainable Transport Program. And just a little bit of background about the program. The ITF started getting active on this issue in 2010, when the Mexico City Congress adopted a very strong resolution on climate change. But since then, I think it's fair to say that we have found it difficult to build activism on climate issues in all of the different transport sectors. So in 2019, we established a new affiliate working group to update our strategy for all transport sectors. And David Gobe is, of course, a co-chair of this group. So just today, there are just three aspects of the ITF strategy that I want to focus on. Number one, the importance of an economy-wide approach. Two, the need for a new public funding model. And three, a worker-led just transition that is relevant to workers in all sectors and which includes a strong focus on women workers and young workers. So just in terms of this first point, what the need for an economy-wide approach. So we've heard a lot today about the challenges that transport faces to decarbonize, and it's more difficult for some transport sectors than others. But transport is very reliant on other sectors as well in order to decarbonize. So we need big changes in manufacturing, we need big changes in the energy sector. So we look at energy, currently less than 1% of aviation fuel is alternative fuel, and less than 5% of energy or electricity is produced from renewable sources. So we've been talking today about the weakness of the market-led approach. And I think with these numbers, this is very clear. And it shows why we really need the public sector and governments to lead the transition with a green industrial policy. And that in turn kind of really puts the spotlight on why we need to think of transport as a public goods. We need to answer the question, what kind of transport industry does society need? At the moment, the answer is let the market decide. And we've talked already today about how this has led to low prices and a race to the bottom. The second issue I want to address is how do we pay for the necessary changes? And my comrade from Korea was already talking about the challenges facing the public transport sector. If we look at the economy as a whole, it is estimated that we need to invest 2 to 3% of global GDP, global gross domestic product, every year in order to make the transition to a zero carbon economy. That is a lot compared to what is being invested at the moment, but it's not a lot compared to what governments were investing during parts of the 20th century, and particularly after World War II. But in terms of how we are going to fund this, we need to pay very careful attention to the funding model. The private sector, the banks and asset managers like BlackRock, who for years have funded fossil fuels, are now saying they want to invest in green infrastructure. But the position that we're taking at the ITF is that we need to focus on public funding. And industrialized countries in the global north have a very important option to fund these long-term investments, and that is the use of central bank debt. So using central banks like the European Central Bank or the Bank of New Zealand to buy government debt to invest in the green infrastructure that we need. And it's important that we do this for two reasons. We need to make sure that we assert democratic control. If we rely on private finance, which ultimately comes from the wealthiest 1%, they will want a very high return. And allowing the private sector this much control is what has created the current crisis. So instead, we need a public funding approach. We also need to make sure that countries in the global south that do not necessarily have strong central banks also have access to investment. So we need to reform the international system, including the International Monetary Fund, so that all countries have access to finance for green infrastructure. So the third point I want to emphasize is the importance of a worker-led just transition. And a number of very good points have already been made about this today in terms of making sure that workers are protected in terms of any changes, that workers' health and safety is protected, and also access to training. And one point that I want to emphasize is that when we talk about just transition, we need to make this relevant to workers in many different sectors. Up until now, most of the debate on just transition has focused on job losses in sectors facing industry shutdown or industry contraction. But other transport sectors face different scenarios. So the shipping industry is in an adaptation scenario. Yeah, it's clear that this sector will continue to have a very important role in the zero carbon economy. But major changes are needed. So for example, the shipping industry will need to make much greater use of alternative fuels. But seafarers have health and safety concerns over these alternative fuels. Ammonia, for example, one of the main alternative fuels that is being proposed is very toxic. And so strong health and safety management needs to be in place. And seafarers also kind of need to make sure, well, we need to make sure that seafarers have access to the training that all these different fuel types will involve. So the main just transition issues for seafarers are about decision-making power in relation to these changes. And when we talk about just transition in different sectors, I think the issues for truck drivers as they move to electrification will be quite similar. We need to make sure that we are identifying these key issues for workers in the different sectors. In other sectors such as rail, public transport, and offshore wind generation, it's a different issue again. These are industries that will expand. And here the challenges for workers are slightly different. Long-term investment in these sectors means that more jobs will be created. But for workers, the key question is making sure that the existing workforce gets access to the new jobs, and to make sure that there'll be more workplace democracy. And I really want to emphasize the importance here of building a fairer system, particularly for groups such as women workers and young workers, that currently needs much more power, which we need to address as a very serious issue. So gender segregation for women is a big issue in all transport sectors. And if we're going to talk about a just transition, we need to make sure that we are achieving a just transition for women workers and for young workers as well. So just to finish up, job losses is going to be an issue in some transport sectors, potentially in aviation, and of course we will fight hard against these job losses. But when it comes to a just transition, we need to make sure we have a broad understanding so that we can mobilize workers in all transport modes to fight for the big scale changes that are necessary. Thank you for listening.
Eh bien, merci Jérémy pour ce panorama complet.
Thank you, Jérémy, for this complete overview. As you reminded us, the investment is not that big because we estimated a 2 to 3% of GDP. And if you compare it to other kinds of investment, it's not that huge. You mentioned standards. You said we had to set the setting for this transition because we are using toxic modes of production right now. Investment in information, how to identify key workers for them to be trained for new skills, new professions, and you need social democracy for all of this, obviously. Not only economic progress, respectful of the environment, of the planet, but something that goes together with social progress. Otherwise, workers will foot the bill. I would like to ask my comrades if they'd like to say something. Could you raise your hand with the reaction icon? Otherwise, I will conclude this debate. We will go around the table with my colleagues. I don't see any raised hands for the time being. David, would you like to say a few words? Very quickly. I would like to send my fraternal greetings. We realize with the many exchanges we've had that it's important to rebalance the various modes of transport. Railways should be up to the stakes, to the challenge. The railway has always gone together with the growth, the development of a territory, of a community. It will be able to be up to the environmental issues and transition if it goes towards cooperation and not competition. So for the Federation, these are the various aspects that I would like to keep. These are the takeaways, so to speak. And we are ready to fight in order to be able to take up the challenge, which is absolutely fundamental for our citizenship. Thank you, David. Jean-Philippe, we had a very rich dialogue. We talked about operation and cooperation between modes, international solidarity, public investment. Maritime transport is also concerned, affected by all of this. So to conclude, I've presented the situation of seamen in the world, and with the UN, we should make all countries aware that seafarers workers are essential, and that if they disappear, the whole economy may collapse. So some European countries are totally unaware of the situation of seamen, and they stop seamen who've been on the ship for 20 months. We have a number of suicides, which we can't even compute. We know that people have died on the ships, and some boats just don't stop because they have corpses on board. So we know that there will be convenience flags, and ship owners will say, well, you have to get rid of the bodies because you can't bring them to the ports. So this is terrible. Thank you. Thank you. I think everybody has understood the issues of maritime transport and the situation of seamen, which is absolutely desperate in this sanitary context. Frédéric? I was telling Jean-Philippe, cooperation, international solidarity. We had a very rich dialogue with comrades from 6 continents, public service, public investment. All of this is key for this ecological and social transition. How would you like to conclude? Well, first of all, it was important to share our experience. We had proposals. Each of us had a proposal, and we needed to share them. We have an obligation. We cannot consume or produce more greenhouse gases than nature is able to absorb. If on the basis of these principles, we must ask ourselves what the situation is. We have outsourced our industrial system. We should bring back these companies to our territories, and we should convey our expertise and our experience and send it to territories which are deprived of this today. We have exactly the same discussion on vaccines. Today, they are dominated by capital, and at the same time, patents are not accessible for the whole world. So this is what we refuse, what we reject. And the question, the issue of transport, how it should be organized, how to reduce the impact of transport worldwide, this is something that should be solved. And this is why we need to rethink industrialization in our territories. From our point of view, the best possible answer has to do with the public service, public control. We need another type of governance with more democracy. Jeremy was telling us about it. We know to make our decision-making much more democratic. It should take into account the common good. We can't leave it up to a few industrialists, a few companies, a few shareholders. The world should be given back to the highest number. And that's where the notion of public service imposes this democracy. Democracy on our decisions, on our choices. And the question of transport is an obligation, obviously. Capital has adopted a number of tools with free trade internationally, and it wants to liberalize trade, to deregulate it, but sometimes it is forbidden. And this is what we refuse, this is what we reject. It seems to me, it seems to us, that for the freedom of movement, freedom of conscience, transport is a right, we said it. But transport should be based on cleaner energy. We should fulfill this right to transport for all, whatever the country where the transport is based. So this raises the question of mutation, of just transition. CGT has a proposal for a professional social security system. And because of our skills, because of our professional competences, this system should be maintained whatever our situation and whatever the type of energy that is used. We talked about the production of thermal engines. With electric engines, we would lose 1/3 of jobs. Well, the CGT proposal would offer guarantees from the point of view of professional training, vocational training, so that workers are not afraid of losing their job, maintaining their rights in terms of seniority, position, job description. And this proposal that is carried by CGT could be a starting point for us. We could discuss how to carry out this environmental transition without consequences on the existing situation while maintaining or making possible a cleaner transport. We could accompany this modernization with a reduction of working time. CGT proposes within the framework of this environmental transition that working time be reduced. How do we finance this? Well, according to us, it starts with the creation of wealth. It should be financed by the added value that we generate with our work. And if we start from this condition, if we work on these spaces, I think we will be able to take up the challenge of reducing greenhouse gases while maintaining the right to transport for us. In France, we've made proposals on how to finance transport. For example, we say that subscriptions between domicile and the workplace should be totally covered by the employer, 100%. In France, today, commuting is reimbursed only in half by the employer. So we propose that the employer reimburses 100%, because a company without employees doesn't generate wealth. So you need people to be able to commute. Then, regarding the financing of infrastructure, which is key, we should have a better planning policy. We are all aware of the fact that the investment needed in transport are huge. And today, very often, our politicians act in the short term, whereas transport infrastructure need long-term investment. And if the shelf life of the stock has if the shelf life is 30, 40 years, for example, then the yearly investment is not that huge. This is how we should proceed, I think. And we should insist for capital to pay for this investment. With the crisis, we saw what happened with the maritime sector, which Jean-Philippe described. A container between Asia and Europe cost 800 euros. Today, it's 10,000 or even 15,000 euros. So we can't accept the impact of market logics on transport. It must be considered as common good, common asset. I have a few examples, which are trails or tips towards a just transition on the scale of our planet, because somebody said it, greenhouse gases emitted by rich countries have countries for everyone, for the whole planet. Rising sea levels, people living close to the coast who could disappear, some islands or some littorals could disappear from the continent. It has consequences on climate change, obviously. For some people, it may be more heat, but for others, it may be the contrary. So these rather erratic climate will have consequences, and we should be thinking in the long term. So this is what I wanted to say with you, David, and with all the participants in this debate on transport modes and how to start this just transition. These are a few tips to continue our discussion. Let's see how we could act together on those proposals. Because if the power relation is good enough, we will win in this battle. And our priority is to master the whole thing. And I think that together we'll be able to reach the sky. Thank you very much for this very nice conclusion. Indeed, the debate is not over. The struggle continues on all continents, everywhere. We saw this with our comrades from New Zealand. I guess John went to bed because it was rather late in New Zealand, but thank you very much. Thank you, Vladimir, Jeremy, the Spanish comrades, Rafael, Pablo, Hugo from Argentina. Thank you, Fabrice. Thank you, Lesia, for having followed our panel. Thank you to the organizers of this conference, CGT, of course, Rosa Luxembourg, Altersomi, Energy Democracy, and Global Libo Institute. I'd like to thank the interpreters as well for the quality of their work. Thank you. I know it's not easy. Sometimes we read quickly. Sorry about that. Sometimes we just go too fast. We will have another interesting debate after this one on women and climate. It has started at 3:30. And tomorrow we will have other debates on solidarity, transnational struggles, and this conference will include Saturday. We will work until 5:30 on Saturday. We will prepare some proceedings. The transport debate was held in the setting of a general debate on the industry, on energy, on different subjects. So we will sum up on Saturday and present a number of proposals coming from all the trade unions who took part in this convention. We will have proposals for COP26. We would like this COP to be very efficient and make possible a real transition from a social and environmental point of view. Thank you very much. Thank you all. There were many people following us. I hope we've answered all questions in the chat box. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.